Warning: tuning your vehicle can be a dangerous activity, and there is substantial risk involved. The dangers include, but are not limited to, permanently damaging your vehicle, injury or death to yourself or other people, damaging personal property due to paying attention to a laptop while driving. This video is intended for educational purposes only. Before altering the calibration of your vehicle, you should verify it is in proper working and mechanical condition. Have a working basis of knowledge of how your vehicle works and how the components interrelate, and understand how your tuning software works. Bottom line, you and only you are responsible for making your own decisions, as well as accepting the consequences of those decisions. I cannot be held accountable for your actions. Hey, what's up, boys and girls? It's been a while. Figured it's time to make a new video. This is actually one that I've been wanting to make for quite a while now, but I've been busy with other things. And I saw some of my other YouTube guys that I followed made a video and kind of beat me to the punch. So I'm like, well, might as well get this one off the old bucket list. Anyway, and I'll link to those other videos at the end. But today I want to talk about engine timing and just a little bit of a secret. And you probably have seen it if you've been around tuning long enough, but I don't know that anybody really talks about why. And you know me, I feel like if you want to beat your enemy, you must know your enemy. And in our case, our enemy is always physics and chemistry, mechanical engineering, so on and so forth. And I shouldn't say enemy, they are our friends, but we need to understand how they all work. So we're going to start talking about peak cylinder pressure inside of an internal combustion engine. And this is something that has been studied ever since the beginning of time with these engines. So this is one of the earliest, most accurate representation, and this was set, you have a transducer and it pops at a predefined amount, 100 psi, 150 psi, whatever you can set it to. It varies. And then it rotates, the paper rotates on a drum that's connected to the crankshaft. And so you get this little graph just like this. And I don't know when this image was captured, maybe the 19 teens or the 1920s, maybe the 40s. I really don't know. But this is, the oldest known one that's of any accuracy. The interesting thing to me is that it seems to hold true for pretty much any four-stroke auto cycle gasoline engine. To make the most power, or I should say, make the most torque, your peak cylinder pressure should occur at 15, 12 to 15 degrees after top dead center, which is very interesting to me. I would think that you would want it later. And I kind of went into that, but I decided I didn't want to bore you to death. So I took out a whole like half of these slides. All right, well, let's move on. But just remember this 12 to 15, we will reference that. So in I think important thing to understand then is, on the left-hand side, we have this timing map. This is a stock OEM map. It's a little bit sketchy looking to me. I do understand, of course, there are other adders and modifiers besides the base map, but either way, um, all this timing map does is move the timing around so that that peak cylinder pressure occurs at 12 to 15 degrees after top dead center. Now, obviously, we know OEM tunes are a little bit safer, right? So peak cylinder pressure would occur after that because they don't want any, nation events or anything push things to the ragged edge. But either way, it's really just the timing of moving the ignition to coincide that peak cylinder pressure at exactly the right time in the piston stroke. So, you'll always kind of hear stuff about the burn rate of gasoline, but probably need to make a few clarifications. Maybe when I think about the burn rate of gasoline, I'm thinking about you have a scientist in a laboratory and he has one molecule of gasoline and he's burning it under a set of controlled conditions. And probably doing changing those conditions and seeing the impact of what it is. But that's really not what happens inside of an engine. We don't have one molecule, we have a whole bunch of molecules. And we're really, it's a three-dimensional, right? That flame kernel kind of, it's a chain reaction, right? It's three dimensions. It's not just one molecule, right? And so there's a lot of things that can influence that. RPM, the compression ratio, temperature, atomization, fuel distribution, and squish and quench. So let's talk a little bit about cylinder heads. I think you'll find that this is probably the biggest contributing factor into the burn rate and timing that you'll need. On the top left, you have a 487 casting. This is, of course, Gen 1 small block Chevys back in the old days. Smogger heads, or you look at that chamber and call it like a bathtub chamber if you want, but either way, it was just pretty rudimentary, right? The engineers are like, well, we need a spot for a spark plug and some valves, and like just scoop something out of the metal and let's just make it happen, right? It was not super high tech. They were very inefficient heads. On the top right, then you have the L31 Vortec casting, and here we start to get to like the first really modern cylinder head on the small block Chevy. Now, this was cast iron, but you can see the port or the combustion chamber has got that heart-shaped or kidney shape, depending on what article you read. You can also see that that spark plug hole is ever so slightly starting to angle over to the exhaust valve. So the Vortec heads, from memory, I want to say, and I have these on my 81 pickup. I want to say they tend to operate in 32 to maybe 34 degrees of timing is kind of their sweet spot. But the other stuff, like that 487, it's not uncommon, 34 to 38 degrees of timing. And that's a lot. And timing is bad. That's parasitic loss. You don't want that. On the bottom left, then, we have the venerable LS3 casting, and you can see the chamber shaped quite a bit differently. You have this little area. See if I get my laser pointer out here. Where did it go? There we go. You can see we still kind of have this top part here for the heart or kidney shape, but it also kind of juts up in here. And you can definitely see that spark plug is angled directly right at that exhaust valve. So, as David Vizard says, the biggest limiting amount to the horsepower you can make is exhaust valve temperature. And I think that's a pretty interesting way to look at things. NA or boost, compression is power, whether you are using that with the piston or you're blowing it in with a blower or power adder, right? The hotter it gets in there, you got to back off timing. And so it's always this exhaust valve. And so you start combustion over here, you reduce the chances of detonation. So in general, the LS heads are amazing because LS engines are not spark limited. Um, Now, if you're on boost, that's a different story. So I'm mainly talking about NA stuff here. These old heads, the 487 and the Vortex, right? You get them on a dyno, you start adding more and more timing, and you're making more and more power, and everything's great. You keep advancing timing and more power. It's amazing, and then detonation. Hopefully, you don't blow up your motor. But the modern LS engines, they're not spark limited, or I should say knock limited. So you can keep adding timing and make power, and then it peaks, and then you keep adding more and more timing, and you don't get any detonation, right? So they're very forgiving. They are wonderful heads. Part of that is aluminum that wicks away heat a lot better than iron. As you remember, basic chemistry and physics from middle school, maybe high school, there's a link in a metal, how well it conducts electricity and also how well it conducts heat. Aluminum conducts electricity and heat better than iron does. So, in other words, it's pulling that heat out of the chamber and getting it into the engine coolant to be carried away and cooled off. Also, we obviously have a more modern combustion chamber that certainly helps too. So, here's the big secret. Basically, when you have your torque is at its peak, right, you need the least amount of ignition advance. That way you don't knock, cause detonation. It's also very hard on connecting rods. But as the cylinder pressure drops, and why is it dropping? It's because you're filling it with less air. So your engine is most efficient as an air pump in a single fill of the cylinder at peak torque. As RPMs continue to rise, that efficiency of moving air in and out drops off. And as that air leaves, right, the actual pressure, when the piston goes up, it's compressing less air. And so we need to kind of make up for that loss of pressure by increasing the timing advance. Okay, so let's take a look at a spreadsheet real quick. Oh, and maybe before we do, let me go back a few slides to the beginning here. And you can see this on this stock factory ignition curve. This is where peak torque occurs. We have maximum cylinder fill of air, so we can't be too aggressive with the spark. But as the engine becomes less efficient and there's less air to compress and thus less pressure, we make up for it by chasing up the RPMs with more timing. All right, now let's jump over to a spreadsheet real quick. Right. Actually, before we jump over to the spreadsheet, let's actually look at the tune where these numbers came from. So in this case, we're going to look at the VE table first. This is our airflow. And you can see we do have a very clearly defined shape in here. And our peak cylinder fill is going to be right in here. And if we look, it's pretty high in the RPM range. So we can see that this is going to be in that 52, 54, 5600 RPM range. Now, when we take a look at the corresponding timing table, we can see the opposite, right? Instead of a peak, we have this depression, but it's not flat. It is smooth and it is contoured, right? So then when we look at this peak depression here, or minimum depression, we can see it's at 5200 RPMs. And we have a nice little smooth saddle shape transition. So when we take these numbers from both VE and the ignition timing table and we plug them into Excel to do some graphing, you can see we have our RPMs here at the top. Here's our, oops, no, I don't want that. We have our timing numbers here. I put in the VE here, but then I divided it by 100. That way they're on the same scale. So they're on the same plane of existence. Maybe that's a good pun for you graphing nerds out there. But either way, we can see this relationship. Airflow peaks, right? Peak torque, and we are at spark minimum. And then as airflow tapers off, we kind of need to make up for that loss by adding more timing. This is really only part of the story. The other thing that we need to think about is really the burn time in gasoline, not in degrees, but in milliseconds, and not just milliseconds, but crankshaft rotation per millisecond, because 20 degrees at idle is a very different thing than 20 degrees at 7,000 RPMs. So let's jump over here to this tab. And now we're really only going to be looking at the RPMs and then the ignition timing degrees before top dead center. So you can see I highlighted here this little red area, these RPMs. This is like our peak torque, right? This is our minimum spark. And then our shift point, you can see, peak horsepower-ish area is something like 23 degrees, right? So we're only adding like 2 degrees throughout this area. But the way we want to look at this is we can see at 2400 RPMs, we're at 21 degrees. So this is going to be down here, this bottom row, 21 degrees before top dead center. Spark plug fires, fuel burn, 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 and then we hit top dead center at 1.4 milliseconds, almost 1.5 milliseconds. So this is how this is looking at, right? Just this timing table over degrees, and you can see this is not a linear relationship. So this is another way to think about this. And then if we think about this, we're saying, well, wait a second. This isn't a straight line. Maybe I'm expecting the burn time of gasoline to be constant. This should be a flat line across the top, but it's not. Well, why is that? Well, You think about that piston, right? The spark plug is at the top of the combustion chamber. It gets a little flame kernel going, and that piston is coming up as the RPMs climb up faster and faster, and it is slamming the unburnt fuel and air charge into that flame kernel and causes a more violent explosion. So while the one molecule of gasoline burn time may be constant in a laboratory, the three-dimensional chain reaction as RPMs climb is not constant, right? It's always changing. And so that's why this curve goes down here. Now let's talk about why ignition timing is bad. So I added this guy up here, right? This is set for 0. So this is 0 degrees after top dead center. So this is kind of ignoring the fact that really it's not about ignition advance. It's really about where is peak cylinder pressure occurring. If we put in, say, 15 degrees in here, now you can see that we have two lines. So this is 21 plus 15 is 36, right? So this is how many degrees the fuel has to burn before it hits 15 um, degrees after top dead center. So this red line, this is all fuel burning before the piston ever gets to top dead center. This is why you don't want this. And when we look at this case here at 2400 RPMs, we're saying the fuel is trying to push the piston down for about 1.5 milliseconds. That's energy against you, making you slower. But we have less time. We only have just over 1 millisecond to push that piston back down in the right direction. Now it's less time, but it is more power. Anything you can do then to reduce this parasitic burn time, aka reducing ignition advance, is only going to net you more power. So this is what this graph is showing, and in all cases, we see the actual burn time that's helping you. I don't know the official term, but power burn time, time after top dead center, is always less than our actual parasitic burn time. So just some things to think about here in terms of timing. It's not about degrees, but it's about manipulating where that peak cylinder pressure is occurring, keeping in mind the parasitic losses as well. Always think about milliseconds per degree. Don't just think about the degrees. Okay, hopefully you found that little jaunt into spreadsheet land enlightening. Let us now jump over and let's look at some specific tunes, see some good things and bad things, see some nasty tunes. And by the way, some of these, um, well, a lot of these are ones that have come across my desk for when people have asked me to help them. Maybe if you recognize your Spark map in here, I'm not picking on you. I'm just using it as an example. Don't beat me up, right? You know me, I like transparency and talking about an educated and making all of our worlds better. So I'm not picking on anybody, all right? Just an example. All right, so here's our first example. Now, this is the factory tune. Oddly enough, you don't see a chasing up the curve. You see a little bit of a step here, about 5,000 RPMs or so, but this is what the factory wanted. Now, you can look at the top. We can see this is a 5.3 Tahoe. Trucks may be a little bit of a different scenario in that we are not trying to wring out every last bit of power from these things. It can be a hot day. You're pulling a trailer going uphill on some entrance ramp, right? Trying to get up to speed. Uh, Not the best time to be trying to wring out every last ounce of torque from the engine, right? So when it's flat, that's safe, right? Because you found peak torque and you've kind of made power there. But after that, unless you're building an all-out race vehicle, this is safe. Now, this particular feller got a remote tune, I believe, from a place that you've heard of. I'm not going to mention any particular names, but you can see that we do see the makings here for a little dip here at peak torque and then chasing it back up. Really not super smooth, but considering the other stuff that I've seen, this is, of course, a lot better. But, um, and this is something, how do you really do on the street to do this properly? And I don't think you can. You really need a dyno to get it on the rollers and test it and find where that peak torque is and start ramping it up. How much will it tolerate? Um, but before it stops making power, or maybe hopefully not knocking. But so yeah, this one isn't too bad. Uh, let's take a look at a few others though. Here's our next one. It is from a 6.2 liter Denali. This is the factory tune. So you can see that it looks like peak torque is going to be about really high for some reason, 5,500 RPMs. Who knows what the OE engineers were thinking? And it does jump up a little bit, surprisingly, for a big, heavy vehicle. And then, of course, it just flatlines. Here's what rolled into the shop, though. This is troublesome, right? I mean, we can see a lot of little rough spikes in here, some weird stair steps, really blocky shapes here. And then you can see that we have about 24 degrees here, kind of in peak torque lands, and then it just kind of drops off. So this may be a situation where, when you gun the throttle, it comes down here and you just kind of stay at 24. And then after 7,000 RPMs, we dip down here into safety net land to keep the RPMs from getting out of hand. But again, this is a not really finely crafted table. Here's an example of a good timing table. I mean, it's kind of questionable up here. I don't remember where I got this one. I think I know, but I think it's from another aftermarket tuner. I'm not going to mention names, but you can see that we kind of have this nice little saddle shape in here for our horsepower and torque to stay nestled in. This area is awfully rough, but who knows? Um, but overall, the power area, not bad. Now, here's another one that came across my desk recently. This is actually a turboed truck. And oddly enough, what do we see in here? I mean, forced induction is its own beast, right? And really, we've only been kind of talking about naturally aspirated up to this point. But even so, you can tell that someone took the time to get this on a dyno and found that peak torque and kind of worked it up here, right? So it's very slight, right? Again, we can't be too aggressive with forced induction, but we can even see it here on this little guy on this timing table. Here is our last one. This is off an LS3 Camaro. This is from a well-known tuner on the forum. I won't mention names. This upper area, all this part throttle drivability, I totally smoothed it out and anonymized it. This is not how it came in. But really, the part we're focusing on is this area down here. But I'm going to tell you this. This, as smooth and beautiful and sculpted and perfect as this is, with no jagged edges, ridges, just random little blips and bloops in here, the rest of this table was also equally sculpted and just absolutely beautiful. Just shape-wise, as a human looking on a curvaceous, tasty little snack, I mean, this was everything. I hate to have to smooth it out, but I didn't talk to them or get their permission before I did this. So I kind of wanted to protect that information from them. But I mean, just look at this gorgeous, gorgeous curve up here. Love it. All right, let's bring this on home. So just a few more things to talk about. So ignition timing is really I mean, it's just a result of fuel chemistry, right? We've been talking about fuel burn speed. You change the fuel, you're gonna have to change your timing map. So keep that in mind as well. And also, timing is bad. So always think about, how can I reduce timing? Real world, that pretty much at our state in technology and commonly available over the counter parts, we're talking about better cylinder heads, right? That's about all there is. So Aluminum goes without saying. I think all us LS guys are using aluminum. I mean, I come from the old school Gen 1 small block Chevy with cast iron heads. I don't think anybody's really running those anymore. Pistons, flat tops, the best. Two valve reliefs, okay. Four valve reliefs, okay. Dome and dish aren't great. That dome impedes the flame kernel propagation, and dish, you lose your squish. So in the end, what's worse, dome or dish? I don't know. Like, I suppose it depends on the combination, but I would design an engine so that I will be using flat top pistons. If not, then I'm going to get two valve reliefs. And if that means I have to fly cut them for piston to valve clearance, that's what I'll do. Proper squish and quench is only going to help your situation no matter what, period. And then long connecting rods. Um, I'm going to talk about a suggested video that I would think you would want to watch after this. But longer rods are better, but it's really pretty far down on the list of things to design your engine for. But when you get the opportunity, maybe you can start thinking about I could go one of two ways, either or doesn't matter, then pick the one with longer connecting rods. Um, the perfect fuel, right? If we could replace gasoline, we'd want something with a high anti-knock index and something that burns really fast and also has a lot of energy. And so that way we could set ignition off at top dead center or maybe slightly after, so we could get rid of that parasitic loss. So, and hopefully, if it was perfect, right, we could time it at maybe 73 to 75 degrees after top dead center. That's when you have peak piston speed, but it's also when the piston and the rod have the maximum mechanical advantage on spinning that crankshaft. But in theory, I think, as you'll see on the next slide or two, whenever I get to it, that may not really be totally feasible. So you also have to think about when is the exhaust valve opening. The LS3 camshaft, that exhaust valve opens 66 degrees before bottom dead center. So that's during the power stroke. I run a GPI SS3 cam and that exhaust valve opens at 93 degrees before bottom dead center. Think about that. The power stroke is 180 degrees. My exhaust valve opens 93 degrees. It's more than half of my power stroke is dedicated to exhaust valve opening, right? That's crazy to think about. And most likely, in some circumstances anyway, the fuel is still burning as that exhaust valve opens, which, by the way, that really sets up. You may think that's bad. And if you do think that's bad, go look at the Atkinson cycle engine, because that prioritizes efficiency over power. So we're building for power, not efficiency. And when that exhaust valve opens under such high pressure and with the fuel still burning, what happens? That exhaust shoots out at a high velocity and sets up the overlap stroke, well, not stroke, but overlap event for success, right? Because it acts like a siphon. That high velocity exhaust is leaving and is creating a vacuum behind it. And when that intake valve opens, it just pulls everything out and evacuates the cylinder and gets you a fresh charge. So then when you think about it, here, power stroke on the LS3 cams, 114 degrees. I'm only 87 degrees with my cam. So here's the crazy thing to think about. Well, let's revisit the same graph that I showed you before. And now we need to think about this line right here. This vertical line represents top dead center. Let me get my laser pointer out. I like my laser. So we can see this vertical line right here. So all this pressure that occurs, actually, ooh, let me try something. Let's do a pen. What color pen do I want? Well, let me pick. Oh, sorry. Technical difficulties. Pen. Let's do green, perhaps. All right. So here's top dead center. All this stuff right here, this does not count. We are building pressure on the way up to the top. top dead center, right? So the first part of this, like maybe we'll just say to here, this is just the piston compressing whatever's air is in the cylinder, right? You can't help it. We're going to have that. Ignition sparks, and then all this, now we have kind of like an exponential growth of pressure. This is all occurring before top dead center. We cannot count that. So once we pass top dead center, we get to this blue section up here, right? This is all real power that's actually pushing the piston down. Once the power or the pressure drops, and then we break even here, now this is like canceling out of the equation, right? Like you divide the left side of the equation by 2, so you can divide the right side of the equation by 2. All this doesn't count, right? This is the only positive power from the gasoline creating heat that's actually pushing the cylinder or the piston down. So you can see here up to peak, this is 14 degrees, but here's the real mind-bending thing. This distance from top dead center to our break-even point, like right here, is only 40 degrees. 40 degrees. So really 12 to 14, 15 degrees, 15 times 2, that's like 30, right? So you kind of have about halfway or you get peak power, right? And then after that, everything below here is cancels out from the piston going up. So really, you only have about 40 degrees of fuel burn time to push that piston down, which is crazy. And then your exhaust valve is going to be opening down in here. Now, one other bonus thing. Can I erase this? Erase all ink. Here we go. Now, you remember a while back I did a video on idle. And this is a total side quest, side topic, right? But while we're here, I think this is a good graphic to illustrate this. Most guys that come from the old carb world and they don't know any better and they're tuning for maximum vacuum like they would on a carburetor are going to have a lot of idle timing. And that's probably going to put their peak cylinder pressure, kind of in this area right up here. What I'm telling you to do is you should probably target this area. Why is that? Well, that is because when you're here and the engine is trying to maintain a certain RPM, it's very easy to adjust by going a little higher or a little lower on the right. This is going to be more advanced and this side's going to be less advanced, but you have a lot of adjustability here. So if you come up here and you're already at top of the line right here and your car the ECM says, hey, my RPMs are too high, I need to or actually they're too low, I need to advance timing, right? Then your ignition timing is going to go from here, it's going to start over here, but that's going to move you back over this side of the curve, and you don't want that, right? You kind of want to be in the sweet spot where you have a lot of adjustability up or down to adjust those RPMs. And ideally, it should be even, meaning maybe you're plus 5 degrees here, maybe you're minus 5 degrees here. It should be fairly even. All right, hopefully all these squiggly lines make sense. Let's move on. Also, smoothness counts. A lot of people always talk about your VE table should be smooth. I agree. It should also be accurate. And sometimes those things, like, I talked about in that one video, bacon strips on the dyno, and, where I talk about the intake runner harmonics. Well, you also have the exhaust and overlap and a lot of things going on that's manipulating the airflow in. So you may have some wrinkles, but really things should be smooth. And there's no difference than your timing table. Now, that one on the left is another one rolled into my virtual shop. That is not a smooth timing table. That's the result of, I'm guessing, copy and paste special, and this is kind of what you get. You don't want that. You want smoothness. This graph on the left is going to be basically, you're going to have a lot of herky jerky. When you're driving, you're going to feel that oscillating and the surging and just kind of overall roughness. And that's not cool, bro. So Be smooth, be intentional. So when you're in the scanner and you're driving and you're looking, this is what you should kind of be seeing. This one on the top, right? You can see it's very flat, it's very smooth. Down here, it's really fuzzy. What do you think the driving experience is going to be when you have all these little fuzzies? That timing is constantly jumping and it's adding and removing torque and jostling you around. You should not see that. So it should be smooth. Now, this can also be a result of, well, not math reversion, but reversion that's really messing with the math. So maybe your timing table is tip top, but you got a big cam or something going on with a blower, and it's just not playing well with the mass airflow sensor. Either way, look for that spark. All right, few more follow-ups for you. Um, I think that's hilarious. This milk tanker, by the way. You don't see that in the US. Classic. All right. So a few more things. So we talked a lot about timing, and obviously you can't just set that willy-nilly to whatever you want to. And I wouldn't recommend if you are new to tuning, the spark table, maybe we could call that the blow up my pistons table. So if you don't know for sure what you are doing, do not mess with that timing table. Leave that up to someone else. Eventually, you'll get to that. If you want to learn more, I did two videos. The part one is really just dealing with the physics and the chemistry involved of detonation and gasoline, what causes knock. Part two is then, all right, well, maybe you have some knock. Here's how you deal with that. Here's how you tune it in HP tuners. Here's how it's implemented by the GM engineers. Eric Weingartner, he's a head porter. He does a lot of dyno testing, and he did this video here that I have the screen print of. And this was the first guy, I think at the beginning I said, beat me to the punch. I've been meaning to do it for a while. And I'm like, all right. I need to do my version of this. I need to get off my butt. So he does a lot of talking. If you just skip to about 8 minutes and 58 seconds, you can see where he talks about it. So go give that a watch. And by the way, his channel's great. I really like watching his channel. He talks a lot about head porting and kind of cool stuff as well. Brian Salter, Salter Racing Engines, also a really good channel. But he did one on long and short rod. And I think that's the video. He also kind of talked about timing as well. And even the length of the rod can impact where you have to set your timing. And I think in the example that he had was they had two otherwise identical big block engines, and the short rod version needed like 2 degrees more timing to make power. So long rods are better, but again, that's low on the list of things to prioritize in your build. But anyway, great video from Salter Racing Engines. Definitely give that a watch. Well, anyway, thanks for watching. Appreciate your time. Um, I hope you got something out of this, and I'll see you in the winner circle. And if it isn't too much trouble, if you could click some of those buttons down below this video, let me know that you enjoyed it. I would appreciate it. I'll check you guys later.